this session. And in the meantime, Marie, I'm going to also forward this over to you to make you the host so you can bring up your slides. But I would love to introduce our lead speaker for today's discussion, who is Marie Pawlak, who, for those of you who have joined our sessions in the past, you will know is an excellent facilitator, has so much insight and knowledge, and just a wonderful conversationalist around topics pertinent in today's organization. So I am thrilled to be able to help guide that dialogue. But Marie, I'll turn it over to you for your own introduction. And then, yeah, Marie does rock. Thank you to whoever just put that in the chat. That just popped up super quick. But Marie, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, well, thank you. I love that I rock. That's pretty cool. I will use my time of introduction to introduce Leslie, who is the host and will be my interviewer, and say that she has been a wonderful partner in crime in these series and has just done a really great job of putting these on and facilitating. So that's how I'd like to use my time to say that Leslie rocks.
Thank you very much. Well, Marie, our topic today is how do we plan when there is no plan? And so this is a topic hitting so many of us as our organizations think about what new work worlds look like while we continue to deal with the pandemic, when we think about what a few months down the road might look like, etc. So I did want to just start the conversation by asking you your thoughts on the topic around planning and where you'd like to begin the conversation.
Well, you know, it's kind of a funny thing that we are all living in times where every day feels like Groundhog's Day, as well as it feels like something has gotten thrown in to change the day, in terms of what we started off the day thinking we were going to do is not always where we end up. And so how do you live in such chaotic times? I think for me, one of the things that I've tried to do, and with this and with talking about this, is that we've created a framework that we call the CST model. And what it is really simply, as you can see, it's really about looking at when we have to create plans, first making sure that the people that are involved in that plan feel that they're cared for, and that there is safety. And safety really means psychological safety as well as physical safety. And that throughout the process, we're fostering trust. Because the truth is, there is no way to plan for what's been going on. And prime example, before we started the call, we were talking about, we have some school districts that they don't even have a plan yet. They're not going to have a plan until the middle of August. And then we have other school districts that they announced to their teachers the plan last week, and school starts on the 13th of August for them. And so they're scrambling to execute on a plan that got thrown at them. And so with that, I think this model really does help people figure out how to plan, because it's always putting in mind people first. And this model sort of came from a book that I fell in love with. I was telling Leslie about this book. It's an amazing book that really was written by a gentleman who happens to be the creative director for Cirque du Soleil. And he really talks about how to have a creative organization and how to bring creativity and collaboration into the organization. And through it, he kept talking about, you have to make sure that people know that they're cared for. You have to make sure that they're secure. And you know, you have to have an organization of trust. And so I started to look at that and realize, well, you need that when you're planning for whatever you're planning, whether it's a project, or an initiative, whatever it is, you need to have those three elements. So that's really where it comes from.
Yeah, that sounds like a really important model for us to follow right now. And I was inspired when we chatted and you told me about this book titled Creative Courage. So one thing I'd love to ask you, and also ask, you know, those of you who are joining us today, you can feel free to come off mute or, you know, chime into the chat, is this idea of creativity. So when it comes to planning and creativity, how do you see that connection working most effectively? What does creativity look like when it comes to planning? And again, I encourage everybody to chime into the discussion board as well.
It's a really great question, because one of the things that when we talk about, having creativity or innovation in organizations, I love when people start the conversation with, I want everybody to be creative, but within this little box.
Right.
And so sometimes when people think of planning, they think of it as we're creating this box. And really what planning really is, it's about making sure that you've got all the contingencies in place and you have the freedom to be able to pivot as you move through your project. And so planning for us with creativity, they're married to each other, in the sense of, if you don't know what your boundaries are for a project, or you don't know how you're going to execute on the project, you're not going to allow people to feel like they're in a safe space to be creative, to be able to push those boundaries, to be able to say, what if we do it this way? So if I don't know where I'm going, it's really hard to feel like I have a space to play.
That's such a good point. And I'm curious, for you and others too, how is that highlighted, if at all, by the current COVID pandemic?
Oh my gosh, it's really highlighted by this. So if you think about, you have organizations that for years were told that they needed to have 5, 10, 15-year plans. And usually it took them 12, 13, 14 months to plan things out and then execute on them. We then asked, all of a sudden, with less than 24 hours in some cases, that they had to create plans and execute on them. And so part of that allowed people to really be creative, because of now they had this boundary of, you've got 24 hours to get everybody out of their offices and into their homes, and you're gonna have to figure out how to do that. And those are things that most organizations would tell you that took them, years to figure out. They were able to do it. And so this has shown us that there is a way to plan and execute quickly, and people are okay with it. People understand. People are willing to go on the journey with you if you show them that you care, you've created a safe space, and they trust you.
There's some lawn mowing going on locally, so I went on mute because I was afraid that noise would be picked up. Those are such great points, and I'd really love to hear from more of you in the chat.
Yeah.
How do you feel your organizations are building creativity and matching that with the idea of strategic planning? Because to some people that might be a disconnect, but I think we live in a time where adaptability and flexibility and fluidity, if you will, are becoming increasingly important. What are you seeing in your organizations? I see Bridget talked about allowing conversation to flow freely. That's a great point, before we instinctively judged based on past experiences. So we do need to allow creativity. It's hard to perform on demand, like a trained SEAL, right? I think, to your point, do need those safe spaces. But I'm curious for some real hands-on examples of what people are seeing in their organizations as to what creativity looks like in today's world. And maybe, Marie or Adrian, and your consulting work, what are you hearing about organizations that are doing things that are kind of remarkable right now?
Yeah, while people are sort of writing in the chat and thinking about it, one of a really cool organization that I recently worked with, one of the things that they decided that they wanted to do as an organization, and they were following suit with a lot of people that said, we really need to figure out how we're going to work with each other in this virtual environment. And so the CEO of the company said he just decided he was going to have town hall meetings. And in the beginning, it was once a week that he would get on a Zoom call. It was open to anybody who wanted to attend. And he would start off with a PowerPoint that had just a question. It would start off with, the first one was, what's the one thing you've always wanted to ask me that you were afraid to ask me? And so it was really kind of funny. And he said he kind of did it because he was feeling disconnected. And he realized that his feeling of being disconnected not only came from the fact that he was disconnected from his team, which is the executive team, but he recognized that he really hadn't gotten to know the people in his organization, that he spent all his time with the executive team, that he had never really walked around and gotten to know. And there were so many new people because the organization had grown so rapidly. And so it was great for him because he got to meet people that in other circumstances he would have never met. And the feedback was that they felt really connected to him. And so as he started talking about the reentry plan, people were not nervous. They did not have as many issues because people had seen him almost in the beginning, almost every week. And then towards, June, it was just twice a month that they saw him. And so when they re-entered this month, they haven't had any problems. People felt safe. They knew that if they were uncomfortable, that it wouldn't cost them their job. So I thought that was really great.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
I think, Marie, that's it. Yeah. Well, Marie, I think that's a really, really important point, that if they weren't, well, it would not cost them their job. There's that trust that you, like, to be uncomfortable, acknowledging that, recognizing that is very important as a leader in an organization. Comfortable too. This is over and over, right? We're all in this together, but really we're in this together. What I've seen strong leaders doing is, again, that continuous conversation, that candid conversation, that availability to be reached out to. And I think that's, at that highest level, executive leadership, making themselves available and being visible, but even down in lower levels with managers of teams, as we're thinking about going back into an office and what that planning looks like. And, because we have very loose plans, if that's right, so much is more unknown than is known right now and could change on a dime. And it's really anchoring to those goals and those objectives. And to that creative point is, get there the best way that you're going to get there. As a leader, as a manager, maybe not having to dictate that so much, but continuing to anchor back to those goals. So that creativity within bases, as long as we're moving in that direction, go about it the way that makes most sense for your team, because every manager is going to know the individuals in their team best, right? So allowing for that creativity, but still making sure that you're anchoring back to those goals. I think that's where I've seen really strong leaders showing up well recently.
It's a great example. And I mean, it really ties in, Marie, back to your model. I don't know if you want to move back one slide, if you are able to easily do that. But I really wanted to focus on this idea of, building safety and security and fostering trust. These are very people-oriented kinds of qualities that we're talking about when it comes to having a framework for planning. And I'm just wondering, how you might discuss that in more detail, what that might look like.
Yeah, so actually what I'll do is I'll advance 2 slides because I think the one after this gives a better idea of that. So we kind of talk about stakeholders in the communication plan of planning. A lot of times people focus so much on the plan, they forget to communicate the plan. So it's one of those things where there's this great plan in place, but nobody knows about it because no one thought to communicate it to anyone. And then as things happen, people say, oh, well, we already thought about that. And everyone else in the organization is like, I didn't get that memo. what happened? And so when we look at the communication plan, we really look at, there are really only three stakeholders. The community at large is the community in which the organization is in, the employees, and then who you serve, who are your customers, who are your clients, who are your students if it's an educational institution. And how are we communicating to those people what we're planning on doing? And part of that is that we have to make sure that when we're planning, we're always thinking about the security of the people we're planning for and with. You know, what are the things that I need to do to make sure that the team is not only physically safe, but that have a sense of psychological safety? Because there's no way that you can foster trust if I don't feel safe with you in your presence. So it's kind of like if the bear shows up at your house, I don't know that I trust the bear not to scratch me because I've made a sudden move. So I don't feel safe, so there's no trust there. If it's my husband in a bear suit, that's a different conversation. You know, just for a silly example, but the point is that if I trust the elements that are going on in the plan, and I trust that you've thought about my safety, both physically and psychologically, then I can trust the plan. I can go with it. I can commit to the plan knowing that those elements have been considered.
That's a great point. And I think it highlights something that I saw Adrian post in the chat around how do we remember to communicate when our days get so busy, right? We move so fast. Sometimes we forget to tell people things. And there is a part of us that needs a little downtime, a little time to process. Mm-hmm. How can we do that with this model?
Well, and this model is designed because you're constantly thinking about the people in the plan. Part of the plan is to build in that communication piece. How am I going to communicate the next steps? So a lot of times, like going back to the example of people have great intentions and they have great plans, and then they forget that communication piece. So for us, when we are teaching people how to do strategic planning within an organization, we put communication up front because we say that is what's going to make or break the success of your plan. If you don't have a communication plan in place, who are we communicating to? What are we communicating? When are we communicating? That frequency of communication. And are we communicating at all levels? That's the other myth that organizations have. They think, well, I'm only going to communicate to the department or the team that's affected by the plan. And in reality, even if another department's not affected by the plan, they need to know what's happening because they have interactions with those departments that are affected. And that's what creates those silos in organizations, is that people walking around going, I have no idea what's going on.
Which could really diminish trust and the safety and all the other elements related to positive communication that you've been talking about.
Absolutely.
When you and I had a chance to talk, you also mentioned an important topic that was really relevant, and that's the idea of embracing failure, something that most organizations, leaders, or even just individual contributors, not always very good at, right? So how do we build, I love this slide here, physical and psychological safety, and how can we embrace that in a way where we allow people some room for trial and error?
Yeah, and that's why this is the slide when you're talking about failure, is that I have to feel safe to fail. I mean, that's really the key for it. I have to feel like it's a space that if I don't do this right, if I screw up, that the consequences are not dire. You know, I always, when I talk to people about failure, I use the example of my mother. My mother was an emergency room nurse, a trauma nurse. And growing up, people would think that's pretty cool, but the reality is we never went to the hospital. If she had the equipment in the house, we would get stitched up, or the only time we went to the hospital was if she just didn't have the equipment, and she would send us with I remember going to the hospital with my brother because there was an accident and she didn't have the thread to sew up the wound. So she sent us to the hospital that she worked at with a note that explained exactly what needed to happen. And we were just to hand it to the doctor, which is what we did. And then they were like, oh, okay, we're all set. And they would take care of us. And we're like, okay. But the reason why I bring up that story is that one of the things that my mother used to always say to us is that if you're not bleeding and no one's dead, it's okay. You're fine. And so that really stuck with me because it was the idea of, if it's not a life or death situation, like it's no one's life is in jeopardy from this mistake, then it's okay. It's a learning opportunity. We can fix it. And in reality, even if it's a life or death situation, if you learn to do that learning loop quickly of, I made a mistake, how did I make the mistake? What do I need to fix? Okay, repeat. Then you could survive a life or death situation. So that's really the example I like to use to people, is that we have to be very compassionate with people when they make a mistake. We're human, we make mistakes all the time. I made a huge mistake last night that this morning I paid for, but luckily it was with a group of people that said, oh, it's okay. And then they said, why were you working at 11 o'clock at night? Of course you made this mistake. But that's the point, is that you have to feel that you're safe to be able to make those mistakes.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And to me feels like it's also part of the transparency, even in your example, to kind of admit, I gave it a try, or I was working later than I should have and my head wasn't completely in it, or for whatever reason, but here's what happened. I had a boss once who always used to tell me, Leslie, don't come to me, just with the problem or the issue or the mistake, but let's hear about your ideas for how you think you can resolve it.
Yeah.
Just what we know, we all make mistakes, and that's okay. So she created like a nice foundation. She wasn't angry or mad. It was very trust building, if you will. But she'd say, like, let's work on the solution then. So how do we do that? Right?
Yeah. And so
Jump to that. I just wanted to mention one thing in the chat that I thought was such a great point. Bridget was mentioning, and this is in regards to how you, Marie, were mentioning that communication to all of our stakeholders is so important. And Bridget pointed out that that is true because we can also provide resources and support to one another when we know what's going on. Absolutely. And when we're living with our blinders on in our own little world and we don't know, not only do we sometimes step on landmines that end up, kind of igniting more than it needs to with people's either emotions or just kind of botching up something, we just don't know, but we also then can't lend the support that we need or the help that we need to other departments. So just wanted to chime in with that because I thought it was such a relevant point.
It's such a relevant point. It really is. And I think we forget that when we think, oh, it's only pertaining to, I'll use a university example. Oh, this only pertains to the business office. Mm-hmm. So, right. Faculty they don't need to know about this, or admissions doesn't need to know about this. Well, right. The reality is that there's such great resources throughout an organization. And as Bridget said, if I know, I can help. Yeah. Or at least I could say, hey, be careful when you communicate with this person because this might happen.
Absolutely. And just as a quick time check, I know I can talk to you guys all day, but we've got about 5 minutes left of our session, and I know you have a few important key points to hit home.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about transparency of in conversation, but really transparency of systems. So you have to create transparent systems. There has to be a way for people to, like you said, like your boss, the example of your boss is such a great example of, come to me with a solution. So come to me and admit that you've made a mistake, but also come to me with some solutions. And so if you're in an environment that has that CST model, it's very easy to update policies and procedures to monitor and respond to emergency situations and to communicate the results of what happened throughout the organization. And so companies that were able to do that before the pandemic are now doing it on steroids, which is fantastic. They figured it out and they're able to do it quickly. And so just because I just thought it would be great for everybody to have, and I don't know if I can do it. So let's just see if I could do it. And I want to make sure everybody gets our source materials as well. I'm going to try to go into the chat, and I'm going to try to add, which I can't do. Well, I can't add a file. So in the email, I'll post it in an email to everyone who attended the model, and any information you want about the source materials that you'd like to get. So I don't know if there are any more questions before we officially.
Nope, the chat's pretty good. I think you're ready to put the final wrap on.
Oh, great.
Well, before you do that, Marie, I just wanted to make one comment, and my internet was acting funny, so I came in so you get a different background view now. Is that, you know, communication that is expedient is important. And so often I have found in organizations that we unnecessarily make that clunky. So I encourage leaders and organizations, like updating policies and procedures, you know, you could think about that and go, oh, right? It's such a daunting thing to do. It doesn't have to be. We overcomplicate our processes oftentimes, and then that's what gets in our way, right? So I'd encourage thinking your communications don't have to be 100% perfect. They don't have to have all the answers. They don't have to necessarily be polished, because if you have that trust and you have that safety and you're following this model, I love this model. I can't wait to read the book. Another book I have to add to my list now. We need a webinar about that, best books. But by having a process in place where you can quickly get to people, and maybe that's a quick video and it comes out weekly and it doesn't have to be polished, employees appreciate that so much more than, oh, let me tell you, but it might be a week late or 2 weeks late because I made it perfect and I have all the answers. Give us updates as you know them. I always say this, tell me what you know, tell me what you don't know, and what you're doing to figure that out.
Well, I love that.
And that's all I want, right? Just keep me informed on a regular basis. It's okay to not know.
I really love what you said too about it being, you know, we do have a plan and we are trying to prepare through communication, transparency, but sometimes that plan changes. And so we also need, you know, we're communicating something, but bear with us, because likely for all of us in whatever industry we're working in, whatever we're planning now is not going to be exactly what's deployed 2 months from now, because we're seeing and we're living in such a changing environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the one thing I forgot to mention that this conversation just brought up is that your plans need to be living, breathing documents. They cannot be things like I made a plan and I put it on a shelf. Especially now, I mean, the rate of change is so fast that you just need to think of your plan as a living, breathing document that's going to get changed, going to get updated. And if you put that throughout the organization, people get used to the change of the plan, because they know, you know, you got to feed the plan.
Here's the plan till there's a new plan. Right?
Exactly.
I used to say that all the time with my team. Here's the plan until we have a new one.
Yep.
Which
so
might be tomorrow.
We are at time, Marie. I don't know if you want to maybe put in a little plug for tomorrow's session, because that's going to be fantastic.
I do. I really do want to put a plug in for this session. This speaker for tomorrow, she is amazing. She is a body communication expert and a body image expert. And she has been having these amazing conversations about how do we communicate using masks. And I will tell you, I hadn't thought about this until I had a conversation with her. And this is going to be a really great topic in terms of if you have to go out into the world, which we all do, and if you have to teach, you have to present, you have to train people, you have to have meetings with people, and you have to do it being safe and wearing a mask. She's going to really talk to us about some things to consider. One of the things I'll really quickly say that made me go, oh my gosh, yes. I tend to be a very sarcastic person if you don't know me. And typically I rely on my facial expressions for people to realize that I'm being sarcastic or even sardonic. Apparently you can't see that when it's all covered, and you can't hear very well. So those are some of the things that she's going to talk about, things to pay attention to when you are presenting or when you're teaching and you have to wear a mask. So that's going to be a really exciting session. So please join that session tomorrow. And then next week, our regular scheduled session will be an interview with Dr. Leslie Page, who is our interviewer today. And Rock Jenkins will be the host of that. And it's about servant leadership, which we need that in this time more than ever. So that's a really exciting session to attend.
Well, thank you.
And just to add, it's a separate registration link for tomorrow. I'm trying to quickly find it because I know I have it saved somewhere, and I can drop it into the chat if you'll bear with me 1 second. Otherwise, I know Marie and I have put this out on LinkedIn and both of our feeds, so you can find it that way too. But if you bear with me for a moment, I think
I was going to say
I have
that
it.
Rock was suggesting to get it into LinkedIn. I'm going to go
Yep.
ahead and stop the recording just to let people go, because I know that there are other commitments. So I want to thank everybody while Adrian's looking that link up for their time today. We hope that you do have an opportunity to join the conversation tomorrow, which will be a really rich one around how we begin to work with masks. Thank you. It looks like you did find a link to it. Adrian included it in the chat.
Yep.
And for anybody who would like to promote it, as Rock said, on their LinkedIn, you can absolutely find it following either Marie or Adrian or myself on LinkedIn. I think we all have the registration for it. But if you run into any troubles, feel free just to email us directly and we'll make sure that you get the link. But we really do thank you for your time and the contribution to the discussion today.
And if you
Great
can
discussion.
donate, please donate to the COVID Emergency Fund.